And so this week we're talking about a unique conversation. And what's cool about going through a book like this is it teaches us to wrestle with whatever's in the Bible rather than like my pet peeve or something that I want us to focus on. It has nothing to do with me. We're just going to wrestle with whatever's next. And so it really helps us, one, to learn how to wrestle through the Bible together, to see what God is about in his heart, but it also makes us wrestle with whatever's there rather than avoiding awkward things or just banking on certain things that are maybe one individual's passionate about. And so as we get into chapter 2, my question for you is this, as we have a conversation. What's the best seat you've ever had? The best seat you've ever had. So it might be a concert. I've always wanted to be on an airplane where you get to sleep. That would be a pretty cool, like the double-decker airplanes going to like China or something. What's the best seat you've ever had? I don't know what it is for you. Think about that for a minute. The best seat I've ever had, I thought about it a lot. And as of recent, I was at a leadership conference, and it was a couple of years ago with one of my friends named Jay. We're sitting like front or second row. Not a lot. It's a pretty small, exclusive thing, and really excited to be there. So we're sitting there, and Jay leans over, and he's like, "Hey, don't freak out. But Mark Driscoll just walked in the back of the room." Now, you might not give a rip about who Mark Driscoll is, but Mark Driscoll for me is like one of my heroes. I became a Christian right at 16. My life changed, and I started cutting my teeth on some of his teaching. He did a great job. He lived in Seattle. He was like he made all the Christians mad, and I loved him for it. And so, like, he was a really good teacher, but also he was always pressing issues. And so he walks in the back of the room. I'm like, that's one of my heroes. And so then what do? I freak out, and I run around the front row. It hasn't started yet, so we're still good. It wasn't that weird. But I went over to him, and I'm like, "How are you?" Right? And I'm like, I don't know what to say. I'm like, what do you say to some guy that you've seen a million times on a video on your computer, but you never met in life? And so really awkward moment, and I kind of messed it up. It didn't really go from there. I didn't know what to say after that. Later we got to talk, and he was a little shorter than I thought he would be. And I'm like, "Oh, hey. You're not as intimidating as you looked on stage. That's great." And so that's my best seat ever that I've had today. I had some good concerts, but I think that one was my favorite memorable moment. Now, what's the worst seat you've ever had? Probably on an airplane, right? Like everybody's experience across the room. I don't know about you. I was thinking about it. I've had some bad airplanes, but the worst seat I've ever had was in a 15-passenger van in the passenger seat. Because I get crazy motion sick. And so actually any passenger seat ever is the worst seat I've ever had. I get so sick. But this one in particular, I worked for a van shuttle service, and I was teaching someone else my route so they could take over because I was quitting. And I got so sick I thought I was going to die. I was ready to throw up everywhere and just jump out the window. And so worst seat you've ever had. What is it for you? Think about it for a minute. We're having a conversation around seating, if you will. And really, think about if you hop onto a website and you're going to go to a concert, does it ever bother you if you have to pay for good seats? It doesn't bother Seth. It should be free for Seth. All right, yeah. So right, if you go online and let's say you're going to go to a show at the Red Rocks, right? You hop online and you click and there's tiers of seating and prices, right? And so when you go to a concert, I mean, you get what you pay for. I mean, would you like to have a better seat? Sure. But you're not mad at the people up front because they have a better seat than you, are you? Not normally, right? Okay, some of you are like, I might be. I don't know. They have more money than me, right? So concert, those seats, you get what you pay for. What about like a sporting event? Same thing. Hop online, get some tickets to it. Nosebleeds are just affordable, right? You're going to go to a Broncos game, and you get some junky seats, and I'm pretty sure they were bigger on my TV than they are right now on the field, right? You're not mad at the people who are close, are you? Not normally? All right, well, what if this week you go onto our website, citychurchboulder.com, and you want to click on Sunday services, and it prompts you to buy a ticket. And what if it kind of like shows like Frontier, like when you go on an airline and they let you buy a seat? And so I want you to imagine this week you go and you get to pick your seat for next week. And, for a little more money, you can sit up closer to me and smell me. And a little, and maybe that you're like, I don't want to pay that fee. Or, hey, actually, you get a discount if you'll stand up in the back. And you know what? You really get a discount if you sit on the floor. Oh, hey, you wanna get baptized? You want to take communion? That's going to be extra. Right? And so all of a sudden you're online, you're getting ready to come to church, and you start to, what's that? Hey, I didn't say it. All right, so that is, wow. There you go. So let's say you have to go through that whole process, and you got to buy your seat for next week. Does that bother anybody? Hypocrites? What's up? Like, you didn't mind at the, no. Right. Why does it bother us? There's something about community, like right? You get what you pay for in certain realms, but when it comes to this, right, that really bother you if like we gave preferential treatment to, race or class or socioeconomic status. Why? Well, part of it is because probably God gave you a conscience, right? Even if you're not a follower of Jesus today, you have this thing called a conscience, and it kind of navigates. And we look at stuff and we say, that's not right. You ever been there? You're like, that's not right. I don't know why it's not right, but it's not right. You ever felt like that? We're having a conversation today looking in the passage that James is dealing with around this conversation of partiality and playing favorites. And so I want you to just sit with me for a second as we're having this conversation. Christianity is the only religion in the world where you don't get what you pay for. Other religion in the world, it's works-based. It's how good are you? How much do you give? How much do you do? Sometimes it's how do you dress. Unfortunately, you might have been in a Christian church before where they acted like that, and that's unfortunate because they really do Jesus a disservice. But every other world religion actually functions on a karma-based idea. You can fit it however you want, but Christianity is the only religion in the world that you don't get what you pay for. In fact, you get far more than you deserve. Really unique conversation we're going to have. So let's go to verse 2. I want you to see this. Verse 1 of James chapter 2. And he's been having a lot of conversations with these believers. Now, you have to know he's writing to Christians who have been displaced. They're in places that are outside of their hometown in context. They're under pressure. Life is hard. And so he's writing them to encourage them. And so he shifts gears kind of from this encouragement section now to some practical just ways to behave. And part of it is because he's heard some things of how they're struggling to behave. And so he writes to them, he says, my brothers, and anytime you see that word, it's going to also include brothers and sisters. So it's everyone. And you need to know when it comes to this conversation of partiality, Jesus was on the forefront of creating equality, right? In a society that would de-elevate children and women, Jesus would elevate them in that moment. And so you have to know that anytime you read, it's not, okay, it's only dudes that this applies to. No, right? Jesus is going to be talking to all of us. But my brothers and sisters, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. So he's talking to Christians. He says, hey, don't be partial. Don't play favorites. So I'm going to give you my big idea as we have this conversation today, and it's this. God never plays favorites, and neither should his kids. God never plays favorites, and neither should his kids. Now, unfortunately, his kids play favorites sometimes. And odds are you know someone who has been affected by that, or you've been affected directly by people who have called themselves Christians that then played favorites to a degree. And it happens a lot. And so clearly there's something happening here when James is writing to this. It's not just he just had a random thought and he said, hey, I think I'll write about this. There's some struggle going on with this church playing favorites, and so he's going to talk to them about it. Now, do you remember like in grade school, like picking teams for kickball, right? Like natural selection kind of rules that dominion, right? Like the kid with 2 broken feet would get picked before me. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the way that our world works, is this idea that the best get the best, and then it's a tier after that. And so if you're short and you're scrawny and you're not popular, you're going to get picked last, and there's a way that we play favorites. That's grade school, and we kind of like graduate out of that, and then we just start playing favorites in different ways. Now, how many of you know that in a household, if a mom and dad, or in a household where parents play favorites, that it really ends up bad for their kids, right? Like when parents play favorites, it ends really poorly. And so we see a really negative byproduct, not only in the home, but also in the world that we live in. Now, unfortunately, some churches and individuals experience this, where maybe you've seen in a community you've been around where you were exposed to it, and you say, they were nice people, but I could tell I wasn't welcome. It was like I had to fit in a certain mold to be a part of their community, or I had to, there was like this moose lodge thing going on with their church, and they just were worried about putting more lipstick on the moose instead of building that community. And unfortunately, God's kids get stuck sometimes in playing favorites. And so I want you to know it, whether you're a Christian or not in the room, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, we're going to have a conversation that I hope is really, really helpful. To not be partial, to not play favorites, to love. Now, listen, I think a lot of our community and a lot of our culture is going to be all about it, right? We're like, yeah, I love people, and, equality and all those cool words that we like to throw out. And I think we kind of are pro that in our society right now, but we have like notches and degrees of how we're willing to deal with it or what we push it on. And so my question for you as we look at this is, what's the motivation? Like, it sounds good, like, don't be partial, don't play favorites, but what's the motivation? Like, there's some people you just naturally like more than others, right? It's not a bad thing. It's okay. You can't be best friends with everybody. In fact, the people that try to be best friends with everybody are terrible friends to everybody, right? So that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about shallow relationships, but we are talking about playing favorites and partiality. And so what's the motivation for this? I just want to give you this real fast. When we're having a conversation, James is assuming that he's talking to Christians, and so they have a basis for their faith. And it's not in making God happy. It's not like, hey, you better be nice to people, or God's going to get on to you, right? Like, you know how you warn another kid, like, hey, be nice to your brother, or you're going to get disciplined, right? No, it's not like that. What's the motivation for Christians to not show partiality? It's because God is not partial. He doesn't play favorites with his kids. And so Jesus invites us into a conversation. I want you to know this as we get into it, that it's an invitation into a relationship. The life of a Jesus follower is all about relationships. So I don't know what you've heard. If you think it's about going to church or being a good person or reading the Bible or giving money or whatever it is that you've heard out there, but Jesus teaches us it's all about relationships, our relationship with God and other people. And it's an invitation. Jesus invites us. He says, hey, I'm going to give my life in your place for your sin so that you don't have to, so you can have a relationship with God, and your relationship with God is going to touch everything else in your life. And so as we're having this conversation, Jesus is going to emphasize it's all about relationships. And here's the cool thing. I get to love God because he first loved me. I want you to know it's not like this manifested, like, try to love God really hard and hopefully he likes me back. It's I love God because he loved me. Now, I didn't grow up a Christian, so when I became a Christian, that's what wrecked me at 15 years old, was God loved me, and he wanted a relationship with me. And so I start this relationship. I don't have a clue what it looks like. I start this relationship, and everything starts to change. And the overflow of a love relationship with God is you start to love what he loves. You know what God loves? People. You and me and the neighbors, the people that look nothing like us, the people that are hard to get along with, the people that we love to be around, he loves them all. So how do we know that? Because Jesus died for everyone so that everyone can have a relationship with God. So I'm trying to bring us into what's the motivation for not playing favorites? Because God doesn't play favorites. And so as we have this conversation, I hope it's going to be helpful. Check it out. James is going to give us in verse 2 a case study of this conversation so that we can put some meat and bones with it. So he says, okay, for example, if a man wearing a gold ring and fine clothing comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothing also comes in, and if you pay attention to the one who wears the fine clothing and then say, you sit here in a good place, and while you say to the poor man, hey, you stand over there, or hey, you sit down at my feet, which that's even more degrading than it would be today because their feet are nasty. They've been walking on the same roads that all their animals travel on, and they're open-toed and covered in nasty, stinky stuff. That's an insult. Sit down at my feet. Have you not then made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? So again, he's writing to some Christians who are struggling with this. He says, hey, so I hear that you elevate the rich and the influential over the poor. And I think what happens is we have this conversation. We say, okay, so yeah, like elevate the poor and down with the rich, right? We live in this weird economy right now where we go back and forth of like, yeah, like help the person down and out, but then we also like bash the rich person. And we need to understand in this conversation that it's not good and bad. Like, all right, poor people are good, rich people are bad, right? Some of you are like hiding your Tesla keys right now because you're like, oh no, like no, it's not a conversation about like, yeah, favor poor people over rich people. It's about don't play favorites at all. They're both equally valuable. I think what happens is like, yeah, let's elevate one and not the other. And that's what our culture struggles with. We swing back and forth. And in the life of a Jesus follower is I can love everybody the same. I can love you no matter what your background is, where you come from. I can meet you right where you are and love you just where you are. But that's a challenge and a struggle. And so the conversation is, hey, don't be partial regardless. Now, I think what's important here is to say, okay, so yeah, like rich people are okay, or they can be. Some of them are jerks, but like, okay, like let's give them the benefit of the doubt. And then poor people can be good too. And I think if you watch James here, he's going to say, actually, no, there's a different playing ground. You're not all good. You're all bad. We all kind of suck to a degree, right? Like there's an equal totem pole way down here, and we all just suck at times, right? And so what's really cool is we're going to see that our value doesn't come from our performance, which our culture tells us it does. What do you do? What's your career? What do you contribute? And then that kind of dictates where you fall on the totem pole. But I think we struggle with partiality. We just have a hard time seeing it. So let me give you some examples. And I'm going to use the analogy starting right now of some seats. I'm going to take the seat because I don't know where my stool went. All right, so I want you to imagine we're talking about seats, and we live in a culture that pays attention to your seat. Like, you care where you sit and who sits next to you and how far you are in certain places. And you can use, a concert venue, and closer is better, further away, or you can use the idea of a table around a host or at a party, or, I was at a wedding recently, and like the family got to sit closer than everybody else, and I'm like, well, that's rude, right? Like, I've known you for like 3 years. That should count for something, right? Right. So I want you to imagine, right? What's the idea of your seat? So we live in a world that wants to fight over seats, right? Where do you sit? Right? That's kind of how we measure each other up too. When you meet somebody, hey, what do you do? What are you asking? Where do you sit? Who do you know? And then depending on your influence and how you're going to help me, I might be interested in where you sit. And so we use chairs to kind of judge how we're going to relate to people. And then uniquely, our culture has a lot of opinions about who deserves to sit where, right? Especially when it comes to politics, right? Like, we see some, now granted, we live in a democracy, so that's okay. You should have an opinion. But we like, that person doesn't deserve that seat. This person does. And we go back and forth. And so I want you to think, like, some people deserve to be up front and some people in the back. And so you probably have seen it. And I don't know where you land. I don't know what your favorites are. But some people are like, yeah, women up front. Women need to sit up front. Men are in the back because they're smelly. Or like, no, men and guns need to be up front. And women are in the back making a sandwich for us, right? Like, yeah, that's rude right there. I just want you to know that is not my stance, in case you're wondering. Or, we're like, oh, yeah, the rich up front, or the poor in the back, or the middle class should be up here, and down with the poor, or, you know what, this race needs to be up front, and these people need to be in the back. And we go back and forth, right? We do it over race, and we do it over gender, and we do it over socioeconomic status, and we do it over age. Old people up front, those hooligans in their Donkey Kongs, right? Like, they need to be in the back. They don't have any respect. And then, or young people up front, out with the old people because they're fuddy-duddies, right? And we do it over sexuality. Gay people up front, straight in the back. Straight people up front, gay people in the back. We do it over personality types, right? Outgoing people up front and introverts in the back because no one likes them and they don't talk good anyway. Or like, oh, no, let's push introverts because they don't like to be up front anyway. Or like, we do it conservative and liberal. Conservatives up front. Yeah, let's go. Or liberals up front. Oh, we live in Boulder, so it's really liberals up front. But it's okay. Or we do it with tolerance and equality, right? We do it 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways. We do it over burger restaurants, and we do it with things that are more important, right? Trump needs to be up front, and Bernie needs to be in the back. We're like, no. Bernie needs to be in the front, and Trump needs to be off a cliff, right? That's where I'm funny. Business up front, party in the back. I'm just seeing if you're paying attention. I would rock a mullet if Danielle would let me. I just want you to know. All right, here's the deal. Here's the point James is trying to make. You can have different preferences. Don't let your preferences become prejudice. Does that make sense? And our culture is really good at this. And the life of the Jesus followers, hey, none of this is comfortable. And you might not even be right. There are some hills to die on as a Christian. Most of the ones our culture elevates are not hills to die on. And so it's okay to have a preference, but don't let them be a prejudice. And so here's the deal. You can disagree and still love someone. I don't know if you knew that. You can disagree and still be friends. We're just not very good at it because it gets uncomfortable, and we're taught to have one way of thinking. And this is where our prejudice comes in. Is someone not like us, we have a hard time connecting with, especially if their lifestyle doesn't agree with us. You can disagree and still be friends. We have a church that partners with us in Texas. They're called Northwood, and they do an incredible job of promoting this. So Christian church, and they engage the Muslim population. They go to mosques constantly, and they demonstrate it in this way. Hey, we're going to have a multicultural faith conversation without compromise, right? So they're not like moving into a Unitarian approach of like, yeah, all roads lead to heaven. Well, no, if you're a Christian, you don't believe that. That's not the truth. And so if I tell you that, I'm lying. But it doesn't mean I have to be a jerk about it either, right? There's a way to have genuine dialogue and conversation. So they took us to a mosque. We got to hang out with one of their leaders. And while they were awesome, by the way, crazy hospitality, really cool. I've never been in a mosque. And so one of the things they said is like the reason that Christians and Muslims aren't friends because they're scared of each other, right? They think they hate each other. They're just normal people that are just as valuable as me and you. Now, it doesn't mean our faiths align. It doesn't mean we agree about a relationship with God and how to get, it doesn't mean that all of that is simpatico, right? But I'm standing there and Scott looks at his friend and he says, hey man, in front of all of us, I want you to believe in Jesus, right? Yeah? And that I want you to go to heaven with me when you die, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I know you don't want to believe any of that, right? Yeah, yeah. And so they have this whole conversation in front of us of how they know each other's beliefs and are still really good friends. Really, really cool. One of our values is that you don't have to believe to belong. That doesn't mean we compromise our faith. What it does mean is that you don't have to believe to belong, right? It means that we can love each other in the middle of it. Now, so how do we do this? Sounds great, but the reality is sometimes our prejudices are ingrained in us, and sometimes they're really hard to root out. And so I think part of it is getting our eyes off of our chair and the chair of others and getting our eyes on the only chair that matters. In verse 1, James referred to Jesus, now his brother, his big brother, Jesus. He referred to him as the Lord of glory. It's a big word. That word means weightiness, heaviness, importance. What's James saying? There's only one chair that matters. It's Jesus' chair. All the other chairs don't have any significance, right? It doesn't matter where you sit, poor, rich. We looked earlier in the series that even that language of poor and rich doesn't even stay at socioeconomic status. It talks about poor, meaning it could be lowly and exalted. It could be influential and less influential. It's not just stuck in your bank account level. And so if we can get our eyes off of our chairs and onto Jesus, I think it allows us to love people where they are. Now, let me give you a couple things as we kind of drive this home. Our mission here at City Church is to help people find their way to God from where they are. And so to meet people where they are means we have to go to them rather than having them come to us. And what that really is about is getting people a seat at Jesus' table, okay? So let's transfer our language of seating, okay? There's only one seat at the table that matters, and it's Jesus' seat. And if you're a follower of Jesus, you have a seat at his table, and the only thing that matters is getting other people at that same table. And our mission to help people find their way to God from where they are, it has no distinction in it. I want you to hear it. It's not help some people. It's not help certain kinds of people. Help these people and not those people. Any people. All people. To help them get to God from where they are. And so sometimes Christians are terrible. They play favorites, and they don't, sometimes it's not even intentional. They're blind to it. That's what we're trying to have this conversation with, is they start to elevate certain sin over others. I said it in the beginning, right? Jesus looks at it all and says, you're all broken. None of you are going to be good enough to get to me. I'm going to give my life for all of you. And so Christians get stuck and we elevate certain sins over others. And we're like, all right, this one's really bad and that one's less bad and this one's really bad and that one's, and those people, they're never getting in. Or you know what, man, they hurt me specifically, so I'm going to write Jesus a specific letter for them to make sure he doesn't let them in. And Christians get stuck on this favoritism because of the way that they see spirituality. And Jesus says it's all the same. And we none of us are going to get there on our own. And so we're able to look at it and say, hey, man, you don't have to believe to belong. Now here's the deal. Let's go to verse 5. I want to wrap this up and help us have some practical next steps. Now, he says, listen, can you hear the, listen, can you hear that? Right? Oh, my goodness, you guys are killing me. God didn't play favorites with you. What made you think that you deserved to have a seat at the table? Now, you didn't earn that seat. You didn't keep that seat. You don't maintain that seat. That seat's given to you by grace. Jesus paid for your seat. You have nothing to bring to the table except for yourself. Just sit in it and enjoy the seat, right? And I want you to think about a good dad who loves his kids, right? I want you to imagine my boys get older. They come, let's say they're out of the house. They come back for dinner. We're sitting all around the table. Imagine the intimacy, right, of a small table. There's 6 of us around the table. And I'm saying, okay, so how's it been going? How much you making a year? And Grace says, I'm making 75. I'm like, oh, yeah. And then Asher's like, I'm making 30. I'm like, all right, Grace, why don't you sit close to me, man? Asher, you could do better, bro. And then Grayson gets favoritism from me based on his performance, right? That's messed up. That's messed up. I want you to think of God as a good dad who loves his kids. He's not playing favorites. I love all you the same. And you're all different. So you know what? I love you differently too. And so you know what? It's not about who's sitting closer to dad. It's just that I'm at the table. And you know what? Listen, here's what's really cool. Not only am I at the table, but I'm here with my brothers and sisters. I'm just glad they're at the table. I don't care what seat I'm in. I'm just glad I have a seat and you have a seat. And I'm genuinely thrilled about that. And so he goes on. He says, listen, my beloved brothers. And there's some loving language here, like begging them to get this right. Because here's what happens. When we play favorites, and when the Christian movement plays favorites, we really undermine all that Jesus came to bring to the table. And so he's like, guys, don't miss this. Has God not chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom of God, which he has promised to those who love him? There's that love language again, right? So listen, you might not be a follower of Jesus in the room, and I want you to know it's responding to God's love that gets you a seat at the table. It's by faith, trusting that Jesus gave his life for you and I in our place and paid for that chair. It's a response to that love, and he's saying, hey, think about it, guys. You're elevating the rich over the poor. But he says, you're looking at it all wrong. You're looking on the outside, and man, aren't the poor in the world rich in faith? He says, there's so much more. They're just as valuable as the next person. Doesn't matter what kind of car you drive, or what color your skin is, or what house you live in, or where you are on the pole of even where you work. You know, like, all right, I'm a VIP, or I'm over here, and I got 10 employees under me. None of that matters. He says, isn't it bigger than that? Verse 6, but you, talking to this church, you dishonor the poor man. Are not the rich ones, are not the rich ones those who oppress you? The ones who drag you into court? Are they not the ones who blaspheme the honorable name by which you were called? Right, so they're so messed up that they're trying to elevate their position and their seat. They're so focused on their seat that they are elevating and giving preferential treatment to the rich who are actually oppressing them and shaming them for being Christians. He said, you guys are missing it. How do you dishonor the poor? Every individual that you and I lock eyes with this week is made in the image of God. That's why they're valuable. Every individual on the planet is made in the image of God. That's why they're valuable. And listen, if you've ever heard anything different, if you've ever experienced anything different, know that sometimes God's kids make mistakes, but God doesn't. God never plays favorites. Every single individual is valuable. This is the love we can carry into the world. Now hear me. Every individual is also broken. No one is right with God by default because of our brokenness. Every single person that we lock eyes with is valuable and simultaneously broken. No one deserves a chair at God's table, and Jesus paid for it anyway. You guys hear me? No one deserves a chair at God's table, but Jesus paid for it anyway. So it doesn't matter how good or bad you think you are, or someone else is, or you've been. Jesus said it's paid for. You just trust me, it's paid for. Jesus died for everyone. Think about this. If you say you love me, and you love Grayson, and you hate Asher, you don't love me. Right? If you play favorites with my kids, you don't love me. That's the sin of partiality. I love this person and not that. I love this race and not that. I love this gender and not that. Right? And he's writing to Christians saying, listen, if you play favorites like that, you don't love God. You're missing it. We live in a world that says, hey, you need to care about where you sit. Here's the deal. If we will remember, where we got our seat in the first place, we won't be worried about where other people are sitting. All we're going to care about is that we're at the table, and we're going to be glad other people are there with us. Does that make sense? That's it, man. So here's the deal. Here's the big idea. Focus on his table, not your seat. That's the cure. That's the remedy, guys. Focus on his table, not your seat. So a couple of things are happening this week. The party in the park, right? You know what that is? It's an opportunity to love our community with no strings attached. And you know what? People are going to be on all kinds of spiritual journeys, and some might be 10 steps away from Jesus, some might be 3. And you have the opportunity to love and serve someone, and maybe God will use you to move them one notch closer. They'll go from a 10 to a 9, or a 3 to a 2. You know, they might not meet Jesus because you gave them a hot dog and a snow cone, but you can have a positive impact in their life that moves them one step closer to getting a seat at that table. You can't make them sit down, right? You can't come shove them sit at the table. You can't make them sit in that chair. That chair is available to them, paid for by Jesus, and they have to accept it on their own. It's a gift. You don't get what you pay for here. Parents' Night Out. It's an opportunity for us to serve and love our community so that someone can find a seat. Free cold brew on Pearl Street on Tuesday. It's an opportunity to move someone one step closer so they can find a seat at the table. They're all opportunities to help people find a seat. I want you to know every day this week, it's an opportunity for you to help someone find a seat. And the beauty of it is, guys, we are all invited to the table. And maybe you're here and you're like, you know what, Drake, I don't even know if I have a seat at the table. Hey, man, I got good news for you. I didn't either. I found out that Jesus loves me, and he died for me, and he paid for my seat, and I just got to trust him with it. I'm like, man, that's a pretty sweet setup, because I know myself pretty well, and I don't deserve a seat at that table. But here's the deal. All these events, they only carry weight if you're there. Snow cones and hot dogs aren't going to get people a seat. It's the love working in and through you and me that helps people know that there's even a seat available. And so here's the deal. Listen, if you have a seat at the table, if you're already there and you're grateful for it, man, thank God. We're going to sing some songs in a minute. Just sing it loud. I am so glad Jesus paid for my seat. So make some room. Save a seat. Make it a priority this week. Who's got put in your life that you could move one step closer to having a seat at the table? And listen, friends, if you don't have a seat, I want you to know there's one for you here today. It's always been there. Maybe for the first time you're finding out it's available. So let me pray for us.